Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at KRC. Thank you all for joining us for our regular monthly webinar. Each month we pick a different hot agile topic, and this month's webinar is all about how to make estimation easier and better. If you'd like to watch the recordings of any of our previous webinars, you can access them all on our website, which is AgileKRC.com. Just look under the resources section, click on webinars. You'll also be able to register for the next webinar on this page, which will be presented by Keith again, and he'll be taking you through his golden rules of sprints and time boxes. So that webinar is going to take place on November the 23rd at the same time as today, 12:30 again. I'm shortly going to pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards, but just before I do, I just want to point out a couple of the features of the control panel, just in case this is your first time using this software. Apologies for the people that are our regulars that hear this every month. But if you'd like to look at the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow inside. You can click on this to maximize or minimize your control panel. If you'd like to ask a question, just type your question into the question box and Keith will take these at the end. So I'm now going to pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards.
Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome everybody to another webinar. We're getting tremendous feedback from everyone about these webinars, and we do very much appreciate this, and we listen to all the feedback we're getting. Just had a quick scan through some of the countries that have signed in today, and we've got just about every continent covered. Some nice sort of countries are coming out here. Colombia, someone is in New Zealand. I'm not quite sure whether you stayed up late or you got up early for that one. And pleased to see several customers that are regular customers here. One particular one, just a name check for you guys over in Chicago there. Hope you enjoyed the Ryder Cup, because we certainly did. Right, we're going to get on with the webinar, and I'll just give you an idea of the structure that we're going down. Firstly, just some introductions and some basics. We'll be going to talk about when to estimate early on, estimate late on. We're going to go through a few techniques. You can go into a lot more detail on the web if you want to, but I'll just let you know all the techniques that are around. We're going to talk about relativity or proximity, and that's to do with things like story points. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people hate them, some people like them, but I'll explain what they are and how they're supposed to work, and try and debunk some of the myths to do with story points. On the registration question, we ask you what sort of experience you are having with the points, and we've got a nice spread, but by far the majority, in fact 50%, nearly 50%, actually don't use them or don't know what they are, so we'll be coming on to that. Having said that, some people finding tremendous amounts of success with it, so it's a bit 50-50 on that one. Those that have used it have either had varying degrees or good success with points, but as I say, I'll explain what that is when we get to it. So just by way of a quick intro, I won't spend too much time on this so we can get on to the actual webinar, but we're a sort of pioneering training and consultancy company. We specialise in Agile, that's what we do, and I've studied quite a few estimation techniques over the time, and just a couple of things there. I've written a book on Agile project management and was fortunate to be voted most valuable Agile player last year at the Agile Awards, so hopefully I should know what I'm talking about. So let's get on with a really important starting point, and I apologise in advance for stating the complete obvious, but it's worth stating this obvious fact, in fact two facts, because I think a lot of people don't realise this. When we go into organisations and we're trying to help them with just moving to Agile and improving the way they work, we often say, what problem areas are you having? And if I had to list a top 5, estimation would be in it just about every time. In fact, that single word, when you say what problems you're having, you get the reply, estimation. Now, if you could be really good at estimation, or estimation wasn't a problem, or estimation was easy, you'd be a millionaire overnight, because it's just a simple fact that estimation is difficult. So fact number 1 that I want everyone to really take full on is the fact that estimation is if you like, by definition difficult. The reason it's difficult is because the thing you're doing is difficult. So if I said to you, can you estimate how long it's going to take you to get to work today, or how long it'll take you to get to work tomorrow, because you're probably already at work, then it would be quite an easy thing to come up with an estimate for, because you've done it a lot of times, you know what it is, you know all the risks, you know all the problems that can happen. But if there was something new you had to do, a brand new project, a new initiative, or you're trying to solve a problem, to estimate how long it's going to take to solve it is going to be difficult because you've never done it before. If it was simple, as I say, it would be easy. But if you can just be very clear that estimation is difficult because what you're doing is difficult, this is almost like the first part of your journey. But what actually is an estimate? Now, I just want to try something with you here, and you might need a pen and a paper for this, so if you can just scribble a few things down, it might help. I won't be asking you to send it in or anything, so just find a scrap of paper somewhere. But what I would like you to do is have a couple of educated guesses at something, because an estimate is just an educated guess. It's a prediction. So the question I've got for you is this. I'd like you to tell me what you would need to know if you were going to build a wall. So just write down on your bit of paper, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 things. What do you need to know if I said to you, I want you to build a wall for me? So if you were going to come up with an estimate, what sort of questions would you be asking me? And I'll give you another 10 seconds. Now I'm hoping you're writing down things like, well, how big is the wall? How many people are going to be involved? What is the skill of the people involved? What are the size of the bricks? Also, some of you might have written words down like quality. What is the quality of the wall? Because if the wall has to stand up for 10 years, this would be different to something that only has to stand up for a day. I just want to try that one more time with a different example. I'd like you to write down what you need to know to work out how long a journey is going to take. So how long is a journey going to take? What sort of things would you ask me about a journey if I said to you, can you estimate how long a journey is going to take? Now again, if you've scribbled some things down, I'm hoping you're writing things down like how far are we going? What is the distance we're going to travel? Equally, what are you going to travel the journey in? Are you traveling it in a car or an aeroplane, or are you walking? What would the traffic be like? Are you doing it in the rush hour, or are you doing it in the evening? Recently did this session at the Agile Business Conference, and someone said it might be different if you've got children on board because you've got to make stops perhaps. So there's lots of factors that go into making an estimate. But if you look at your 2 lists, I think you'll find there's some commonality, there's some overlap. Because when you make an estimate, it's quite surprising, but there are only a few variables. There's not hundreds and hundreds. There's maybe 3 or 4 or 5. So I've got some examples on the screen there, and if we're talking about building some new software or creating a new product or changing a business process, how big is this thing? How complex is it? What are the skill levels? And the first thing I want you to try to get a feel with estimation is to try and identify these components, these variables, and I'll show you how we're going to factor this in later. Another important thing is when to estimate. And again, first things first when you're estimating, try and ask yourself, what exactly am I doing in terms of what environment am I in? Is this a sort of light bulb moment where we don't quite know what we're actually trying to do? It's very vague, the specification, and we don't quite know how we're going to solve it. So there could be a very big margin for error on your estimates. So if we take a project, for example, where we don't quite know how we're going to solve it and we haven't quite defined the problem, it might be that those early estimates in the early days of the project might have a variance of 50% or even 100%. Whereas if you've got an existing product like a TomTom SatNav or Garmin and you're going to put a new feature in, it's probably going to be different because you've done many features before and you will know a lot more about how things take. So importantly, you need to know what environment you're in to start with, because projects have high levels of uncertainty early on, whereas in a product environment, you actually have low levels of uncertainty in terms of, as you go along. Now, I've got a little bit of a challenge for you coming up, I believe, and here is your challenge. Now, I've got one request to everybody listening. I know you're sitting there with lots of devices and iPhones, etc., but please don't Google the answer to this question, because I have a question for you, and with your colleagues or on your own, I'd just like you to have a guess at how tall you think the Shard is in meters. Now, the Shard is the tallest building in London at the moment, and it's only recently been completed. But how big do you think the Shard is in meters? Now, if you're working together, and I know we get a lot of feedback from people listening to these webinars saying that they're sitting in a room of 5 or 10 or 20, which is absolutely fine, by the way. If you are in a room with other people having a discussion, you're probably finding that you can make some decisions and work with other people to try and come up with some sort of credible answer, because just off the top of your head it is probably quite hard. So if you think about how many floors are in that building, well, it's not 5 or 10, it's not 1,000, in fact I don't know how many myself, but it's probably in a region of 100, give or take a few. But how big would a floor be? 2 meters, 3 meters? Again, using a little bit of logic, we can try and work out how tall the actual thing is. Now, I know some of you have Googled it by now, but the actual answer, it depends where you go actually, is between 308 and 310 meters. Now, have a look at your answer, and it could have been quite a long way out, but how far out was it? I'm hoping nobody listening to this has said something like, it's 3 meters high, or it's 5 million meters high. And the fact is that human beings are pretty good, they're not brilliant, but they're pretty good at coming up with some idea of how tall something like that is. So, as I say, first things first, you've got an idea, a rough idea, but it could be well out. And the reason you might be very far out is because you're not necessarily experts in building things like the Shard. So what I'm going to do is link that back later when we start to talk about how we can use points and how we can use more sort of team estimation to get sort of better results. Now, in terms of where we're going there with that example of the Shard, and when we're talking about, if you like, in a project context, the one thing that I want to get across is instinct is pretty good. The most common answer I get when I ask, how do you estimate, is somebody puts their finger in the air or says, we just put our finger in the air, as in we have a guess. Now, this is actually good, and I'd like to sort of encourage it and say there's nothing wrong with instinct or an educated guess, but the key thing we've got to do is back it up. We've got to back it up with a few things. And the first thing we've got to do is back it up, if you like, with evidence. So how many times have we done this before? What other buildings could we look at? Again, at the Agile Business Conference, it was quite interesting. One of the delegates who came up with their guess, and their guess was 325 meters. And they based it on the fact that they liked climbing what are called Monroes, which are particularly hills of a particular size in Scotland. So the guide used some logic, and he'd used some analogy, and he'd come up with his idea, and apart from those that were Googling it, he'd actually got the nearest one on an educated guess. But again, he'd gone for instinct, he'd then gone for evidence. And what we did earlier with the journey and the wall example is start to build some sort of algorithm. So build your variables for what your situation is, and start to look at how we can adjust these variables to come up with an estimate. So the sort of thing I'm talking about are words like complexity. So if you've already built something, and then the one you're about to build is a little bit more complicated, we'll multiply it by some sort of factor, like 1.2 or 1.4. Again, don't just say, oh, I'll double it. Hit it with some sort of ratio. Again, the team might be less experienced than the team that did the original version of whatever it was. So maybe we multiply that by something like 0.8. But what you need to do with your estimation is build an algorithm, Keep it simple, only 3 or 4 or 5 variables, and use these little multipliers to act as some form of machine to actually come up with some sort of prediction. So go with instinct, go with evidence of what you've seen before, and adjust it with your algorithm, and you're going to be in a much better place. And the final thing to do is document what these assumptions are based on. Now that's really important. Again, at the conference that we've just come back from, one of the teams that did their estimates on the shard, because we asked another question as well, which was how much do you think it cost, and they made the assumption that this didn't include buying the land. So this idea of these sort of 4 things, instinct, evidence, algorithm, and then document your assumptions, gets you to a situation where we can be, if you like, unemotional and very logical and more sort of evidence-based about the assumption that we're trying to get to. Right, what I want to do now is a poll. So I want to have a look at something about how you work in your organization. And this is a little bit sensitive, so you might want to talk about a friend of yours if you want. But what we find at KRC is estimation sometimes sits in a slightly difficult environment at an organization. And what I'm talking about is what I call the hostage culture. So if you say an estimate for something and it's early days on a project and you're having a bit of, a real guess, and you're saying, well, I don't know, maybe 6 months, are you held hostage to that estimate? Does that estimate come back to haunt you later on, say 12 months later? Does someone come up to you and go, well, I've got an email from you and it said 6 months. Does that create a bit of fear? Do you think, maybe I better say 9 months or even 12? And does someone, when they hear your estimate, sort of halve it because they think, oh, they've probably overdone it? So I've got a poll question for you. Again, slightly emotive, so I'm just trying to find out where we are so that everybody else can have a look at how other people work. But if you have a look on the screen very shortly, there's going to be a poll. So, would you say there is a hostage culture, as I've just defined, at your organization regarding estimates? So, yes, quite often, occasionally, or no, not really. Right, I'm going to finish pretty soon, as most people have voted. Quite interesting. Right, I'm now going to close the poll and see how we get on and share it with you. Right, if you have a look now, I think that's quite interesting. It's absolutely bang on a normal distribution curve. 10%, and that's quite high, saying we've got a hostage culture. Now, I suppose that's good news and bad news that it is only 1 in 10, but that's still a massive figure. And equally, there's only 1 in 10 that have no hostage culture at all, and that's where we're trying to get to. But by far the bulk, 80% in the middle there, 81%, quite often, occasionally, quite a lot. Okay, I'll explain what I'm going to do with this in a moment, but I'm going to go back to my screen, which I hope works, because sometimes it doesn't. So, how does your organization really go about estimation? And the poll findings there, I think, are really quite interesting, because if you have got this hostage culture, think of a number, it is extremely damaging. Now remember, 90% in effect of those people say there is some degree of a game going on, and this is where you've got to try and break this down. And this is why, if you can get these certain disciplines in place, you can get yourself into a better place. So one of the biggest things to do with every estimate is put a confidence factor on it and get everybody signed up to what the confidence factor means. So using a range is quite a good idea. So instead of saying 6 months, say 6 to 9 months. But equally, another project, you could say 6 to 7 months, and this gives an idea of the amount of uncertainty and risk involved. But again, be careful, because when you say 6 to 9 months, do some people look at the 6 and some people look at the 9? Again, a delegate at the conference, and I'm only sharing it with you as his idea, which I thought was interesting, is when you give a range, give the range backwards. So say it'll take between 9 and 6 months, just to manage, if you like, people's expectations that they don't just hear the first one. Again, I thought that was quite a nice little trick. A rule that not many people know, but we quite like at KRC, is called the 50-90 rule, 50%, 90%. And what we mean by the 50% is, if you like, a coin toss. So what is, if you were trying to do an estimate, and you can all do this now while you're listening, think about your journey home from work tonight. If I said to you, can you give me a figure that you're going to get right half of the time, namely 50% of the time, what would your journey home time be? Now I want you to do the exercise again, but this time what would the 90% figure be? Namely, 9 times out of 10 you'll be right. Okay, the 10th time something might go wrong and you might end up being late. But this again gives a confidence factor in terms of a little bit more than just saying 6 months. You know, what's the variables? How do things actually adjust? But the key thing we're trying to get to here, the nirvana, if you like, is the idea of justification and removing emotion. And this is really useful in the hostage culture situation, because if somebody says, well, I want it done for less, or 6 months is no good, you can just sit there and go, well, here's the metrics, here's the evidence, here's the algorithm, and you know, here's the confidence factor. And don't say it sarcastically like I've just done, but basically you can explain, these are the facts, this is the evidence. And this idea of working this way can put you in a much better situation. Now, we did an exercise at the Agile Business Conference, and it's the sort of thing we also do on training courses, where we try to get people to make a jigsaw. So we give a very simple jigsaw out to one of the delegates on the course or at the conference, and it's only 12 pieces, and it's actually a jigsaw that's aimed at 3 to 6-year-olds. And what we do is we get a group of people. They're not allowed to take the lid off the jigsaw. They can just see that it's a jigsaw of a small, you know, it's a child's jigsaw, and we get people to estimate. But what we use is a standard Agile technique, which is based on something called the wisdom of crowds. And this is about, collectively, if we work together, we can come up with an accurate estimate. But the thing we have to do is work independently and not be affected by other people in terms of peer pressure. Because if people are calling out estimates and suggesting things, it affects how other people actually make their guess. Now, on the right-hand side on the screen there, you can see the actual, these are the figures that came from the conference that we've just been to. And there were 8 or 9 people, and they came up with these guesses for a jigsaw. It's not the jigsaw you can see on the screen, by the way. That would be quite easy, I think. But the estimates were ranging from, I think the lowest was 20 seconds and the highest was 90. But if you've got a series of low estimates coming out, it's very difficult for people to then think, well, I was going to say 90, and they might move it down to 60. But what you do when you do work this way, which again is called wisdom of crowds, is you do not average it, you do not take off the top and bottom. What you do is you discuss why you've come up with your estimates. Because the person saying 20 could be, well, they could be a bit mad, to be honest, or they could be an expert in jigsaws. Equally, the person who's saying 90, it could be the same thing. But what we do is we vote with our estimates, we discuss, and we re-vote. But it's very important that people either write them down on a post-it to make sure they're not prejudiced or affected by other people. Again, if you want to look at more of that, look at wisdom of crowds. There are, now I'm just going to go through some techniques. I know we've got a vast range of experience on this webinar, from very nursery slopes of Agile to quite experienced, but I just want to take you through some techniques and explain what they are so you can go and have a look. Now, one of the most commonly well known is something called function point analysis or use case point analysis. And this is something where you get into the detail of what you're trying to do and break it down into about 30 or 40 different variables, weight them, measure them, turn a handle, and out comes something called function points. Now, you can look this up, but it's a very dry subject area, and in Agile you can use it, but the problem is that you don't do a lot of upfront work in Agile, so often function points can be a bit limiting. Now, my advice for certainly most of you on the webinar is I wouldn't bother with function points to start with. Maybe when you get very advanced and you've got massive scaled up projects and you're in maybe a factory setting, maybe. But I would suggest to 49 out of 50 people, as a rule, I wouldn't go down the function points route because we let detail emerge later and the use of function points early on isn't very good. Wideband Delphi is an approach where if you've got somebody comes in with a spec to you and says, how long do you think this will take, you send it out to 3 people, 3 project managers, 3 consultants, and they, again, a bit like the jigsaw, they evaluate it in isolation, send the information back into a central point, and that person sends out the 3 scores back to the 3 people who have just given some estimates. Again, it's stopping the sort of prejudice and it's allowing people to see what other people think, and then by going back and forward, working out what the differences are. The classic agile ways of estimating, though, are your story points, t-shirt sizes, and planning poker. Now, story points are controversial because a lot of people like them and a lot of people hate them. But the key thing to bear in mind about this is it's just a form of relativity. It isn't actually a time per se. T-shirt sizing is the same as well, where if you do some first cut estimation on a series of features, let's say you've got 50 requirements or 50 features you need to estimate, well, put them into 4 groups to start with and call those groups small, medium, large, and extra large. Now you need to be clear with those categories what they mean, and the best way, KRC, we recommend you going 1, 2, 4, 8. So in other words, it doubles each time. And you can't put them in between these gaps, in between these categories. You just load up as a first cut what's the small ones, what's the very big ones. Now again, we haven't decided on a time yet or how long it's going to take. It's just a first pass as to what's a relative sizing. This is often called planning poker. Planning poker is a little bit more specific and uses something called the Fibonacci sequence, which I'll come on to in a moment. And there is a website called planningpoker.com which explains everything very easily in about 5 minutes. But again, the key thing with this is they're very agile, but they're not actually about time or estimate just yet. Top-down, bottom-up is another form of estimation where you can maybe use t-shirt sizing to come up with some higher level top-down views, then break down each individual component, or maybe just 1 or 2 of them, and look in absolute detail from the bottom and see if your bottom-up estimation agrees with your top-down estimation. So again, a broad view at the high level, break it down, add all the component bits together, and see if the little component bits together equal what your top-down estimate was. A sort of sanity check and validation. I've talked about team estimation, and I have to say we're very passionate about it. Don't just let the project manager give the team a load of estimates. It's best if the team come up with the estimates because you get buy-in, ownership, and you get this wisdom of crowds. Another really powerful estimation technique is what we call estimation en masse, or altogether. So if you've got a team of 5 or 6 people, you've got a team of 50, you've got a list of 50 user stories or 50 requirements, then just get them on the post-its and throw them up on the wall very quickly using t-shirt sizing. And the speed is what you get. You can come up with a first cut estimate in probably about 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, it'll take you 10 or 15 minutes to refine it, but what we're trying to say here is that if you go through every single user story or requirement and go, is this a large, an extra large, a medium, and you spend 5 minutes on each one, you can find the morning's gone and everyone's getting a bit depressed. This sounds chaos, it sounds like it can't possibly work, but as I say, for the first cut, 70% of the estimation is really not controversial at all. You just need to spend your time on tweaking and moving it around. So don't be scared of, as I say, throwing 50 index cards up on a wall and estimating them using t-shirt sizes. It's highly effective and it's high speed. So let's get to this crunch area, this relativity. I don't know what Vegemite, Marmite. I don't know how international these words are, but people say with Marmite you like it or you hate it, and the same goes with these points. And what we're trying to say with relativity, and the first learning point about why people use these t-shirt sizes, is people are very good at the relative sizing of things. They know what's twice as big as, when X is twice as big as Y. If you're comparing animals, for example, an elephant to a horse, human beings are very good at knowing the relative ratios and sizing. Whereas estimating the height of the shard, which we did earlier, that's a lot harder. It's a specific value. I've got my teeth back in. It's a specific value, and that's quite hard. But humans find relative estimation easy, and that is why the point system is used. So before you get into how long and how much, just have a think about the relative sizes. That's 3 times the size of that. That's 4 times the size of the other one. So this is why t-shirt sizing is a good little system, and that's why go careful. It's not the be-all and end-all. You haven't come up with a time yet, and make sure people are aware of what those numbers really mean. Now this then takes us to the bit that people love, people don't love, and that is this idea of the story points in terms of the using the correct values. Something called the Fibonacci sequence. And this is the numbers, the series of numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. And what it is created by adding the previous number to the next number. So 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, and so on. And a lot of people use these figures to do their estimation, and it's if you like, a slightly more sophisticated level of relative estimation compared to the t-shirt sizing. But it's a little bit lumpy, and it's not as brilliant as people make out. And I'm just going to show you one slide about one of the slight problems with this method of estimation, which will be particularly relevant to those people who are using the points. Now, could this rounding error and this problem with Fibonacci be costing billions? Well, I'll leave that thought with you. But if you look at the graph that's been shown here, it's the numbers along the bottom that are, if you like, a more sophisticated form of t-shirt sizing. Now, whether you use 21 and 34 and 55, most people round those to 20 and 50, and people say once you're getting to a relative point estimation of over 50, really it's too big and it should be broken down. When you're actually planning and loading up things into your time boxes, the most important thing is to keep the numbers low. You really should be using numbers like 1, 2, 3, 5 and 8. If you're using 13 and 21, they're seen as quite big. But remember, we've only got the relative size yet. We don't know how big it is in time. Now, in a project context, or if you do have to come up with some estimates because you need to know when this is going to end, you need to work out what 1 means in terms of days, or what 5 means. And then when you can work out one of them, you can work out all the others and work out how long your project's going to take. Some Agile applications, particularly in the product environment, funnily enough, don't try and work out how long these things take. They just get working. And after 2 weeks, if they realize they can get through 45 points, then they just load the next time box up with 45 points. This is the relativity. And the word given to that is the word velocity. It's trying to calculate how much you actually get done. Now, if you look at the graph here, and I won't dwell on this too much because it is a little bit like rocket science, but one of the problems with this relative estimation is the fact that the very early stages of this line is actually quite lumpy. The gap from 1 to 2 is 100%, the gap from 2 to 3 is 50%, the gap from 3 to 5 is 66%. It's not actually smooth, and most people think it is smooth, but it actually isn't. And what we've got at KRC are some much smoother curves if you want to use this point estimation system, and there's a spreadsheet you can download at the end of this webinar. But again, if that's looking like rocket science, and to 50% of you I think it might be, just look at t-shirt sizing to start with and see if it gives you some value. But remember, there's 2 distinct steps. Get the relative size, then go in and try and get a hard number. Because at the end of the day, somebody's going to need to know exactly how much have I got to pay and how long is this going to take. Right, I think we'll have another poll. So In my travels, one thing I quite like, or one thing that gets me quite surprised, is the fact that people don't tend to look hard at what they've done in the past. And I'm talking here about metrics and capturing data from previous projects. So the poll we're going to have a look at now, which I'd like to have a look at, and again, part of the reason for these polls is so you can look and see what everyone else is doing, is about capturing data and how long it took from previous work or projects. So if everyone would like to read that and have a vote, do you do it? Do you do it quite often? Do you do it occasionally, or not really? So have a look at that. Right, you're all pretty quick at voting here, so I've nearly got, I think we'll launch the result there and show you what it is. Another very smooth, normal curve there for you, those that are into stats. So if you have a look now, you should be seeing the results coming up on your screen. And again, I don't know whether you guys are all working together, but a nice bit of symmetry. And a little bit like the hostage culture as well, but this one is perhaps a little bit more interesting. I think the hostage culture one was quite serious, but this one's quite interesting because I'd say only 16% of you are actually using metrics quite regularly, and really you should be doing that all the time, to be honest. So 34% quite often, but 34% occasionally, and 15% not at all. Those two people in the bottom categories, I would try to get you to move up to the one above as soon as you possibly can. Very, very important to look at how long it really took. Now, I know the real situation you're in, and the situation you're in is I haven't got time to go back and look. But the trouble is, your next bit of estimation is coming along, and if only you had captured it and used it, you might find yourself in a better place. So, my advice to you, and I don't know how many languages this translates into, and I know we're being listened to in places like India as well, but it's get nerdy, be an anorak. So become a person who's really into metrics, really into the data. Now, it might not look cool, and you might be sitting there going, oh, that's 1.23 higher than what I expected, but actually you'll look cool eventually. Build your own algorithm, save your assumptions, keep the metrics. You really do have to look back to go forward. Capture how long it really took. If we take the example of the jigsaw, the gentleman who did the jigsaw yesterday took 1 minute and 4 seconds. Now, that's a metric. Capture it. If the guy's doing a 24-piece jigsaw next, you know, okay, we might not just double it, but at least we've got something to go on. If someone's a bit better than jigsaws than he is, we can multiply it by a different figure. But this idea of building your metrics is really important. Create your own little book of wisdom. Now, you might want to keep it in your desk and not really tell your friends, but after a while, when you suddenly start to become evidence-based, metrics-based, algorithmically based, suddenly you start to make informed opinions as opposed to, I think it's about 6 months. Then calibrate your estimates. Make a prediction, see what happened, and adjust. This is called calibration, and validate your predictions. Just make a prediction and see what the results came in. There's something called empiricism, or being empirical, and it's a brilliant concept, and it's embedded in things like Scrum. And the key thing about it is almost don't try and look into the future, just look into the past. And if something that size took 5 days, well, it's going to take 5 days in the future. And this, it's something to do with what's called process control theory, but it's the idea of always looking backwards to go forwards. But if you haven't got any metrics, and remember from the poll there, 49% of you haven't, you can't make those informed decisions. Again, start to build ratios. If you're getting really nerdy, try and build ratios. How much time do we spend in design? How much time do we spend in test? Just build some ratios, because you can then start to think, well, if I spent this long in design, it means it's going to be that lot in the build. And one particular technique I like, which is a simple technique you can start using now, especially if you've got a work in progress board, is as soon as something goes up onto your work in progress board, put the time and date that it went up there, and then a few weeks later when you take it off the board, put the time and date that you took it off. What you then have is some sort of cycle time about how long that's been on the board. That doesn't tell you everything you need to know, but it is a pretty interesting stat or statistic to show you how things are taken to go through the whole, if you like, work in progress period. Now, this is very much to do with what's called continuous flow and Kanban or Kanban, however you pronounce it. But as I say, if you want to try that as a little technique, it's very simple and very effective. So, what I'm going to do now is just summarise and hand over to Claire for a short while, but if anyone's got any questions, if you'd like to start putting them into your question box, we'll see if we can take some questions, and we'll finish in about 8 or 9 minutes. I will try and answer all the questions I can, but we get so many that we might not be able to answer them all in the webinar. But the final point I would say is don't forget that an estimate is only an estimate, and the better you are at it, the better you will be at hitting deadlines and protecting quality. It is tough, but you know, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, as they say. Right, I'm going to just hand you over to Claire for a moment, and then we will go on to questions. So Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Keith. So yeah, Keith mentioned the Fibonacci sequence earlier, and he has got his own KRC Fibonacci spreadsheet, which is available to download after the webinar today. So if you are interested in downloading that, do go onto our website, which is AgileKRC.com. Click on the resources section and you'll find it under free downloads. While you're on that page, if you do want to download a copy of Keith's slides today, you will find them under the presentations section under free downloads as well. So the next webinar is called The Golden Rules of Sprints and Time Boxes, how to get more control and be more productive, and that's going to be November the 23rd at the same time as today, 12:30 again, so we hope you can join us again then. If you're interested in more detailed training on this subject of estimation, because it is a huge area, we do offer a one-day in-house course on this subject. You will be able to find information on our website, where you can download a course information sheet, or do feel free to contact us after the webinar and we can give you more information about that. We offer public courses, in-house training and coaching, as it says there, and if anybody's looking for an Agile assessment that we can map out your Agile journey, do contact us after the webinar. So I'll pass you back to Keith. We've got quite a few questions coming in at the moment, so I'll hand you back to him. If we don't get to all your questions, please do feel free to contact us after the webinar. Both myself and Keith's email addresses will be up on the final slide. So back to you, Keith.
And thank you very much there, Claire. Yeah, we've got lots of questions coming in, and I'll try and answer as many as I can. And any I can't do, I'll try to get to afterwards, although I have to say that with the volume we get, we don't necessarily answer every single one. If it is really urgent, get back to us. Question from Gerald here. In a hostage situation, how do you get yourself out of trouble? I think it is actually quite difficult to solve this one, and the reason is it's you've got a cultural problem. It's the blame game. People are a bit political, and really you've got to try and take that particular thing head on. You've almost got to say, look, how do we want to play this? So if you're dealing with a senior executive or the sponsor, and you're getting told to, you know, cut it in half, I think you've just got to sit there and say, look, I'm basing it on this and I'm basing it on that. How do we actually play this? Because it is just quite simply a mindset, and you can often get in a situation when it's really not worth your while to try and go and paddle upstream, and you may as well just have to go with the flow. But it is something I believe you should passionately take head on. It is something I think you should raise and almost say some of the things that have been said in the webinar. Look, how if we've never done it before and it's complicated, how on earth can I know exactly how long it's going to take? I can only give you this. But if you're going to scare me and hold me to account on this, I'm going to have to pad it up and go higher. And I have seen departments become so dysfunctional that they've actually been outsourced because they were getting through so little work. So very difficult question because it's a cultural one, but I would just go after it. A comment here from someone comparing actuals with reduced estimates due to hostage taking can help. Actually, I've just read that one and suddenly realised I don't actually understand it, so I might come back to that one later. What have we got here? With Agile, can you estimate, this is from Paul, with Agile, can you estimate the whole project and then refine it with each time box? The short answer is yes, and in fact that is a very good, powerful way of actually working. So come up with your project estimate, which might be 6 months, then start breaking your project down into time boxes and start estimating these time boxes and see what you're getting done in the time. Now the secret there is what I call planning horizons, and just plan the early time boxes, maybe time box 1 and time box 2, and see how they go, but only have a rough idea of how your estimates for later time boxes, the detailed level. What you can then do is, after you've run time box 1 and time box 2, you can start to get a feel for whether you're right or not and validate that project estimate. But to directly answer that question, this is called planning horizons, and the further away something is, the less detail you have, but the nearer something is, the more detail you want. But they synergize, so the low-level time boxes will be backing up the high-level project estimation. Should there be a correlation made between team estimation? This is Sina. Should there be a correlation made between team estimation in story points and high-level project estimates? Again, I'd say yes, we need to correlate. The problem we've got, though, is that a team estimation, if it's just based purely on points, is a little bit arbitrary, because if you have 2 teams working on 2 different time boxes in the same project, they might just be slightly different, and what they call a 5 isn't what the other team calls a 5. So it's really important when you have different teams working on the same project or in the same program that you don't mix these team estimates, because you wouldn't be using the same base value. So this can be actually quite dangerous. But so I would try and correlate it, as in, how many points are we saying, how long did it really take? But you've got to be careful when you move between different teams. We've got something about, if projects are different, it's difficult to use metrics as they're not realistic. So I think the point there and the question is, if projects are different, how do you compare one to the other? But this is where this relativity comes in, because project A might be different to project B, but the key thing about this is it's not totally different. It's not like, as we say in the UK, chalk and cheese. We might have a situation where this one is similar in many respects to that one over there, but it's got this and this added. And this is where using the metrics and then multiplying them by these algorithm, by your factors, you can sometimes come up with something that's a little bit more than just a random guess. It's very rare that a project is completely completely new. We've never ever done anything like it, at all. Is there any value in, as well as logging assumptions, explicitly stating events which may trigger a re-estimation requirement, so that in the event it occurs, these can be revised? And the short answer is yes. Log your estimates, log your assumptions, because things change. We did a really good project recently where suddenly a lot of estimates were done, and then they suddenly decided to introduce a whole new area of technology while in flight, and this then affected all the estimates. But that was because it was Agile. It was just taken in the stride of the people working on it. But as I say, the fact that an assumption had been made and then a new assumption had been made about a month later just meant that this is why we haven't been able to deliver 30% of the functionality we said we were going to deliver. Right, I've got through some of these questions, but I have to say this is probably the most questions that I've ever seen on a webinar, because estimation is quite a hot topic. So I'm going to try and have a look at those and get back to some of you via email. But one thing we try to do is make sure that people joining these webinars know when they're going to start and when they're going to end. So what I'm going to do now is to say thank you very much for the questions and your attention today. I've got a fantastic turnout in terms of attendees. So from myself, Keith Richards, thank you very much.